everybody. I'm Sherri Snelling, a gerontologist, author, and host of this Caregiving Club newscast, which we're bringing to you the week of February 9th. So we have a lot to uncover with you. We're going to focus a little bit on February Heart Health Month and some of the risks for heart health that caregivers face. We're also going to talk a little bit about spousal caregiving and some studies that have come out about spousal caregiving and things like pre-bereavement and also broken heart syndrome. And that's kind of in recognition of Valentine's Day for our people who are in love. And then, of course, on February 20th, we celebrate National Caregiver Day. We've got some really new, interesting services and programs that we want to share with you. And on February 25th, we have our annual, actually, it's the 6th annual CareCon event. This is a virtual online event that's put on by Hilarity for Charity, which is the nonprofit to support dementia caregivers that was started by Lauren Miller Rogan and her husband, Seth Rogan. And I am very, very honored to be asked by them to be one of the workshop presenters where I'm going to be presenting on managing anxiety and protecting caregiver well-being. Two of my favorite things that I'm going to be talking about is how do we lower those anxiety levels and how do we make sure that we're practicing good self-care practices. So that's going to be a really great event. And I want to just highlight that because you can join for free and we'll have links on our episode guide page and also on our YouTube page that you can follow to join us for that. And then finally, in our pop culture section, we are going to be talking about the very tragic case that is still unwinding around Savannah Guthrie, TV morning show host for the Today Show, and the alleged abduction of her mother, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. We're going to talk a little bit about what are some of the lessons and things that we're learning as caregivers as we watch this story unfold, hopefully with the safe recovery of her mom. And all of our prayers go out to Savannah and, of course, her family and to her mother, Nancy. So with that, we want to remind you, please subscribe because we're bringing these newscasts to you every couple of weeks. As I said, this is the week of February 9th. And we want to make sure that you follow us because we've got all the great news that's happening in the workplace and caregiver wellness and well home design and even some of these pop culture headlines. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in to our caregiver wellness news. So for our caregiver wellness news, we've got a lot of things to unpack for you, but I wanted to start first with, of course, February being Heart Health Month. We know that heart disease is the number one killer for both men and women. Women, although suffer some additional risks, if you will, women are more likely to die from a heart attack, not survive it. We know that 45% of women over the age of 29 are now suffering from some kind of cardiovascular disease. That can include, high blood pressure and other things. So we really want to emphasize the heart health aspect for women and particularly for caregivers because a lot of the risk factors, and those can be things like, again, not getting enough sleep, maybe drinking too much wine, not getting enough good nutrition or exercise, picking up bad habits like smoking again. All of those can become risk factors for caregivers. And it's so easy to fall into those things because we're overwhelmed, we're stressed, we have high anxiety, we have depression. We're juggling a lot of balls as caregivers, and it becomes really tough, maybe a little bit tougher than just the general population out there. So we really do want to emphasize that for caregivers, it is important to find those 7 minutes that I talk about of me time, get that self-care, even if it's just little spurts. It doesn't have to be a lot, just little things you do for yourself. The other thing, too, that I want to note, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in other episodes that we do on news. We've got a lot of stuff coming up on brain health, but a lot of things you do that are good for your heart are also good for your brain. So you're kind of knocking out two things at once. Your heart health, your brain health is getting a boost from some of these things that you can do. I wanted to share with you a graphic, and I'm going to have this. It's a blog that's up on the Caregiving Club website. We'll have a link to this, but I did a graphic I put out on social media called Heart Health in the Five Senses. So as you guys know, my kind of expertise and my focus as a gerontologist is in neuroscience, in positivity psychology, and those types of things. And I really believe in understanding more about our brains and about the five senses. We're starting into this new era now. I'm going to write a LinkedIn blog, I think, about this called the Neuro Era. And it's really all about, neurodesign and neurosensitivity and all these other things, and also multi-sensory activities and experiences. And that goes back to those five senses. And, they're inherent in brain health, our five senses. And I wanted to just share with you how that relates to heart health. Okay. So let me take you through the five senses. First of all, sight. The warning signs for serious heart conditions, such as heart attacks and strokes, can be detected during annual eye exams. It's because the retina tells us so much during those exams. I mean, we can even start to diagnose Alzheimer's risk and diabetes and other things, but heart health risks for sure. And so you want to make sure you maintain those eye exams annually. Make sure you're getting your eyes checked, because it could be the early warning system that we don't think about for some other health issues. The second sense is sound. So 40% of people with high blood pressure experience hearing loss. So we all know that we start to lose, our eyesight a little bit declines, our hearing declines as we age. But as we have things that relate to heart health, like high blood pressure, we're going to increase the decline for things like hearing loss. And again, hearing loss is not only related to heart health, but it's also related to brain health. And it is now a predictor for potential Alzheimer's and dementia risk later in life. Okay. Third sense is smell. Older adults who lose a sense of smell have a 30% higher risk of developing congestive heart failure. So this is a really interesting one, because we're now seeing so much science and research come out about the sense of smell. Again, its relation to predicting things like Alzheimer's. We know that during the pandemic, the people who had COVID, and particularly people who had the long COVID, talked about a loss of smell. So that's a serious issue that needs to be addressed and watched. But again, older adults who have that loss of smell, and we do, again, hearing goes a little bit, eyesight goes a little bit, sense of taste and smell goes a little bit. All of those things are related to aging, and that's kind of normal. But if there's anything that's a little bit more severe, or where you're really not able to smell certain things anymore, that can certainly, again, be a red flag warning for congestive heart failure. The next sense is taste. Craving salt. Okay, I'm guilty of that. I'm not a sugar person. I'm a salt person. Craving salt and having a lower sensitivity to bitter tastes is associated with higher risks of heart disease. Oh, goody. So again, just being cognizant of what what our lifestyle habits are, good or bad, how that relates to ongoing health issues. We just want to become, I think, a little bit more educated about how the brain works, and also these five senses which are locked into the brain. And then finally, our last sense is touch. And that's, this is a great one. We're going to end on a positive note here, because affectionate touch releases one of your happiness hormones, which I talk about in my book, Me Time Monday. And that happiness hormone is oxytocin, which is our love, trust, bonding hormone. Great hormone for Valentine's Day. But affectionate touch engages the vagus nerve. Now, you've probably heard a lot about the vagus nerve of late. It's being talked about a lot as it relates to our stress response in the body. It's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It starts at the bottom of your neck and goes all the way down your spine to the bottom of your spine. So it is the longest nerve. And when we are able to calm the vagus nerve, because it does react, okay? It sends out the signals and the inflammation that are part of that stress response. When we're able to get it into a relaxed mode through breathing, meditation, and some other, even there's now vagus nerve stimulators, like we talked about on our last episode that we saw from CES, lots of technology out there to help calm that vagus nerve. This is becoming now the big focus for a lot of people, But again, relaxing that vagus nerve, getting it out of that stress response as quickly as we can, puts the body back into balance, which we call homeostasis, and it reduces your stress and your heart disease risk. So all of these things, as I said, very much related to your heart health, also very much related to your brain health. And I'm going to keep doing these 5 senses graphics as we go through the year with different things, whether it be sleep, whether it be, environmental wellness, other maybe diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, because I just think it's really good to be aware of our 5 senses and how it does definitely relate to our overall health. So with that, let's move on. As we know, February 14th is Valentine's Day. Wishing you all, great love. Whoever the love of your life is, make sure you give them a hug on Valentine's Day. I have written a blog called Caregiving Love Languages. It's really interesting, I think. Of course, I wrote it, but it's an interesting take on the 5 love languages, which was a book that was written by Dr. Gary Chapman many years ago, and it talked about how we all have kind of a different love language that emerges in how we communicate and participate in our relationships. And so I kind of took that as my foundation point and applied it to caregiving. And then I added some things too that I've seen happening in caregiving, the words that we use, the changes that I've seen in some of the terminology. Is it a caregiver? Are you a caregiver or are you a care partner? I'm going to talk about that in the blog, and I think there's some interesting things that you'll find in that if you're in the aging and long-term care services, or whether you're just interested out there in language and all those kinds of things. I also mentioned National Caregiver Day. That's February 20th. We have a special day now dedicated to caregivers, both family caregivers and professional caregivers. So we want to do a shout out to all of those caregivers in our life. Again, give them a hug, send them a thank you note or a thank you text. Just recognize the value that they bring to their loved one and what they're doing as a caregiver, but also to society in general. I've talked about this a million times, but we've got, 65 million caregivers in America right now, the largest we've ever had. And really, the caregivers are unsung heroes because they are the largest volunteer long-term care healthcare army that we have. Overlooked, underpaid, actually not paid. No boot camp for you to train you. You're just on your own. And what you do really props up the long-term care system. 80% of the long-term care that is delivered to our older citizens in this country is delivered by a family caregiver. So again, do a shout out, do a thank you, celebrate. If you're an employer, think about really recognizing this day as just another instance in the calendar that you can really recognize those employees who are in the workplace delivering all of this great stuff and trying to juggle all of their responsibilities at work. And for many who are in the sandwich generation, also, managing family life and kids and all kinds of stuff. And then finally, February 25th, as I mentioned, is the 6th annual CareCon event put on by Hilarity for Charity. Lauren Miller Rogan and her husband, Seth Rogan, started this foundation years ago, and it was mostly to address Alzheimer's education and brain health education for a younger population. They really wanted to motivate high schoolers, college age people who were maybe just starting out their careers, early 20s, into really understanding how Alzheimer's was going to affect their generation, because again, it is one of the few diseases we don't have a cure for yet. We are seeing a higher prevalence of Alzheimer's, of course. It's 1 in 6 now who develop the disease, and it continues to grow because we're living longer. So kudos to Lauren and Seth for what they've done. And I've been very honored to be tapped by them to be part of their CareCon event the last couple of years. It's a virtual online event where you can listen to panels, and Lauren and Seth, of course, are part of it. They also get some wonderful, celebrities who have been caregivers and others, experts, really great experts. And then they have people like myself who are gerontologists and experts in, dementia and brain health. And we do workshops. So I'm going to be doing the workshop on managing anxiety and really building your caregiver wellness plan. So I hope you join us for that. It is a free event, which is great. and it is held on February 25th. So we're going to have a link to that, and you can sign up for that. Now let's dive into the spousal caregiving. I mentioned this. So this is actually this was a study that was posted, or an article in the Washington Post, and what it was talking about is the caregivers who are in their 60s and 70s and who are caring for a spouse who has a chronic illness or disease often go through a period of what they call pre-bereavement. And it's before obviously someone passes. We go into the 5 stages of guilt with a diagnosis, not just death. And those 5 stages of guilt, we're going to talk about more in the future. I do lots of webinars, by the way, on this. You can check out some of the webinars that maybe I'm offering on my YouTube channel, but I do a lot of them for employers and employees in the workplace about the 5 stages of guilt, the guilt and grief, which are the twin G's of caregiving. But, the guilt stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Now, there's now a 6th stage of grief that's been added called meaning, finding meaning. And I think that comes after you accept what's happened. What does this now mean for the rest of your life? But we don't just wait for death for these things to happen. We go into these stages of guilt and depression and all these other things prior to that while we're caregiving. And one of the things that the article points out is not just the emotional toll, the financial toll for spouses. And so one of the things that it pointed out is that half of spousal caregivers are over the age of 75. That makes a lot of sense, right? That's when most of our chronic illnesses are kicking in. Some of us are still pretty healthy and staying well out there, but maybe the spouse is not. Or maybe you're just managing a couple things like maybe arthritis and some joint pain, those kinds of things. Many of these spousal caregivers are still working. So that is interesting. And it's a little different, I think, from being an adult child caregiver. And I say that because many of the sandwich generation caregivers aren't living with the older person they're caring for. Mom or dad is either still at home, or maybe they're in a memory care, an assisted living, or a senior living community, and we visit and we're still very much involved, but we're not necessarily there on maybe a daily basis. The other thing too is that, the sandwich generation, I think, is waking up more to getting more help. So bringing in-home help in, whether it's just to prep meals or, help out with, some companionship or maybe a little light housekeeping, things like that, until things get a little bit more intense. And then, of course, you need a lot more help. That isn't to say that adult caregivers are totally, just taking the responsibilities and giving them to a professional, but they are getting maybe a little bit more professional help. That doesn't happen a lot in spousal caregiving. And, a lot of psychologists that I've talked to have said part of this is the mental, mantra that we have when we get married in sickness and in health. And it feels like, okay, I made a promise. I've got to stick to that. That means I'm on the front lines of taking care of my spouse. I'm not going to default that to someone else. Now, we do see that if the wife is the one who has the illness, let's just say the wife has Alzheimer's disease, because we know that 2/3 of Alzheimer's cases are women. So now the spousal caregiver is the husband, and he's fairly well. We do see that more men will bring in some outside help to put things like dressing or bathing or putting on makeup or doing her hair, things that maybe men aren't as used to, and other stuff as well. But when it comes to women who are spousal caregivers, almost all of the tasks and all of the duties are falling on their shoulders. And of course, they're aging as well. And when it comes to the financial picture, this is where it gets really scary, because you are seeing the cash flow right out the front door to take care of a lot of different costs of care. And you're starting to worry about your own future. What if we spend all the money on my spouse? What's going to be left for me? So, couple things I just wanted to have you think about is when it does come to the financial picture. So we talk about being eligible for Medicaid means you have to spend down. You can't have a lot of assets. You can't have a lot of money in the bank. You can't still have like any kind of income flow for the most part. You have to get it down to a low number. It's usually around that 2,000 number a year, which is obviously way, way below even the poverty level. But that makes you eligible then for Medicaid services, which would be provided for free. Well, there's little nuances if you're still married. So, for instance, you own a home. Well, your spouse still wants to live in the home. How do they keep the home and still make you eligible? Or, what if they, do these things and then they need money for their own care? How are they going to manage? So I just want you to know there's something called the Community Spouse Protection Rules. And this is part of Medicaid and Medicare. And it's where the wife or the husband does not have to lose everything for their maintenance of their own lifestyle and their own care and their own place to live. But there's a lot of little details. And by the way, you have to be aware, sometimes these rules change. And this is where you really need an expert. You need an elder law attorney. They are specialized. They are not just an estate attorney, they are specialized in senior care. They know Medicaid inside and out. They follow the changes. And Medicaid, by the way, changes state by state because it is a federally funded program, but it's also a statewide funded program, and the states manage it, they administrate it. So, what you might get under Medicaid in California is going to be different from what you get under Medicaid in Florida. So, wherever your loved one lives, that's what you have to be familiar with, the laws in that state. And this is why these elder law attorneys become so essential, because you find an attorney in Florida to help you navigate mom's stuff because that's where she lives. But, you cannot sell the home, or issues of eligibility may apply. You may make your loved one ineligible for Medicaid just because you sold your home, and now you've got not only the taxes to pay on that, but it's the asset of the home and how that's being divided. You may live in your home, but maybe your younger daughter and husband decide they want to, they're going to save up for a house, so they move into the house. Well, now you've got more income coming into that house. How does that affect your husband or your spouse's Medicaid eligibility? So you kind of see the quagmire we're getting into here. So as a spousal caregiver, just be aware, or if you're a sandwich generation caregiver and you're kind of helping to guide mom and dad on some of these issues, because mom's the caregiver for dad right now, you just need to be aware of these things. And again, the elder law attorneys, to sit down with them, you have to pay. Of course, it's an out-of-pocket fee, but they might wind up saving you hundreds of thousands of dollars and helping you navigate things, more properly than you can hardly do on your own. Like I said, it's very, very difficult to stay on top. I'm an expert in this, and I can't stay on top of a lot of it. So there you go. So elder law attorneys are really important. Full podcasts, I just wanted to note that relate to what I just talked about. So one is a really great podcast we did with Dr. Jessica Zitter. Just love her. That was actually back in season 2, episode 3. It's called A Caregiver, A Love Story. She did a film about spousal caregiving and about end of life. And she is a hospice and palliative care doctor. So you may want to check that out. It's a great interview. The other one we did more recently was season 5, episode 55. And that is with Harry Margolis, who is an elder law attorney in Massachusetts. So again, Harry was able to kind of talk more eloquently, if you will, about Massachusetts law, but he also gave us some really broad strokes on elder law attorneys and how they help families, and particularly the sandwich generation, navigate all of the costs of care and all of that. So you may want to check out that podcast as well. So moving on, for our caregiver wellness needs, I always focus on, the health of the caregiver. We know that about 80% of family caregivers have disrupted sleep, and that can mean you're not getting enough hours. It could mean you're waking up numerous times during, the night, maybe based on anxiety or whatever it is. Your rhythms, your circadian rhythms are thrown off because maybe your days are all different. Some days you're getting up super, super early to take mom to the doctor. And then, but then you're not getting to bed until late, and that's not normal for you. And we know that the normality, keeping the routines of getting up and going to bed at the same time every day, is also as critical as getting the hours of sleep you need. So all of this is part of your sleep health. So here was a study that really scared me. Again, I probably focus a lot on what's impacting myself, and then I like to share it with you, but I'm a night owl. So those are, in the sleep science world, we call it chronographs. And chronotypes. We'll do something on this around Sleep Awareness Week in March. But there's night owls, of course, and then there's morning larks or whatever, the people who love mornings and get up super early and are super happy. I am super cranky until I've had at least one cup of coffee kick in. But anyway, I'm a night owl, and there was a study done on night owls and saying that they have more risk for heart attacks. So here's what it found. That it was a study that was actually published in the Journal of the American Heart Association. They actually studied people from ages 39 to 74, so a very broad cohort. They had about 380 people, I think, in this study. We like to see studies over 1,000 people only because it's got a little bit more what we call validity to it. When you're trying to extrapolate, okay, this is how we see the general population, and if you're even just applying that to the American public, we got 350 million people in the US, and you've got a study of 300 people, and you're telling me that we can apply this to everybody. So you can see the more people you have, the more validity you have, but it's not bad. It's not bad. And it does back up some other studies that have been done out there. So that gives us a little bit more credibility as well. But all of these people that were in the study had no known cardiovascular disease. So no high blood pressure. They weren't on medications. They hadn't had any kind of mini strokes or anything like that, any heart issues at all. And what they found is that of this group, the night owls had 79% higher prevalence of overall poor rating for health. Now, the American Heart Association will have a link. It's called Life's Essential 8. Again, it's 8 lifestyle factors. It's nutrition, it's, moving and getting some exercise. It's not smoking. It's, getting good sleep. So there's 8 essential lifestyle factors that are used in a lot of the heart studies that are done out there. So overall, night owls, 79% lower rating or poor rating, and also disrupted circadian rhythms. So, and that put them more at risk for having the circadian rhythms disrupted. Just something to think about. As I said, I'm a night owl, so I pay attention to these kinds of things and I try to be careful. But it is something for us to think about in terms of our sleep habits. Is this something you may want to think about? Can you change it? Or at least pay attention to getting the good hours of sleep if you can. Because again, we know that we need the stamina, the energy, the positivity, mindset. And all of those things get really thrown off when we have bad sleep, right? We're irritated, we're tired, we're fatigued, we're not focused. None of those things are good for life, for anybody. So we know that sleep is really important, and I wanted to bring that one to you. So next, we're going to move on to our Well Home Design News. Hey, so Well Home Design News, we're actually going to focus on kind of what we call aging in place. Okay, that's a term that's used in the long-term care industry. I kind of don't like that term. It just really means that the majority of older Americans have a desire to live in their homes as long, as safely, as independently as possible. That's what that means. But anyway, when we talk about this, we often couple this with what's going on in in-home care. What are the needs there? And I wanted to bring a couple things to you that I saw in the news recently that I thought were interesting. So the first one is from AMAC and Independent Women. And they're using a storytelling project to support policy that would then, of course, support those older Americans who are living at home, who are aging at home, and many of them with the support of a family caregiver from the sandwich generation or other caregiving. So the Independent Women and the Association of Mature American Citizens, so that's AMAC, they announced this collaborative project. It's called Aging at Home, Living with Dignity. And as I said, it's really a strategy to get people to tell their stories, and then they use the power of storytelling to get legislatures and policymakers, both statewide and also up in the nation's capital, to take a look at what supports are needed. So there is a project that they're actually pushing right now called the American Companion Program, which is a modern way to get the support, the daily assistance, the companionship, the respite for caregivers, a lot of things that we talk about, you can get those types of services right now through a lot of home care agencies. So, Comfort Keepers is one that comes to mind. And we've had Sadia on our podcast before, but those agencies will provide that type of service. And it could be everything from a little companionship to give the caregiver a break so you can go do things on your own. Or maybe it's preparing a meal or doing light housekeeping, or maybe, helping them get, dressed or undressed, things like that. And what these two groups, the Independent Women and AMAC, are saying is that's great, but it is an out-of-pocket expense for families. So how do we take that cost burden off of them? So they're pushing for different policies around that. How does that get covered? How do we make this part of the bigger picture of long-term care for families? But they're also talking about something interesting you may have heard of from the State Department called the au pair program from the State Department called Bridge USA. And of course, what it is similar to any kind of au pair situation where you have a younger person who comes over here to the US from a foreign country. Maybe they want to take advantage of, going to college here or whatever, but they go into the home to very often au pairs have been thought of caring for children. Well, what this program is talking about is let's make the au pair program something where we can also take care of our older parents. Because as we've talked about, statistically, we now have more older parents over the age of 65 that will need care than children under 18. So we've got to balance the child care and elder care, poles, if you will, along our caregiving journey and our lifespans, because we're going to probably encounter both. And even if you decide not to have children, you're going to encounter the care for an older loved one. So Bridge USA is the program. You can check that out. It's very interesting. So this is according to AMAC. They said one major barrier is the 2013 home care rule, which narrowed the longstanding companionship exemption and imposed wage and overtime rules that drove up live-in caregiving costs, pushed many families and sandwich generation caregivers to rely on informal, under-the-table arrangements. This is kind of a way to address that and make it, so that it's more official and everything's above board. So what they're asking is if you're interested in sharing your story and you are an adult child caregiver, a spousal caregiver, a sandwich generation caregiver, really kind of any kind of caregiver, we're going to have a link. You can go to their website where you share your story and basically, you just post your story up there. And again, as I said, they use that. They put those in the packets that they give to lawmakers. So your voice will be heard as part of this Gen Z generation caregiver that I talk about in my book, Me Time Monday. We want to hear those voices. So that's one interesting program that's going on. The other bit of news that I found really addresses more of the veteran population and veterans caregivers. But I always like to bring this news to you because even if you're not part of that population, these are things we should be thinking about as best practices to transport into the general caregiving population. When I say that, very often there are some really great programs that come out of the VA. And they are done well. There's a lot of caregiver support. There's 30 hours. Is it 30 hours or 30 days? I always get this mixed up. We'll have it correct on the website, but you get a big chunk of time as a caregiver of a veteran that you can get respite care paid for free to come into the home and take care and watch out for your loved one and maybe be a companion with them while you go do something. So a lot of stuff is being done in the VA community that I think is wonderful if we could also then just extrapolate that across the caregiving universe and get that into other folks' homes. But here's what's going on with vets. So previously, the VA Home Health Care Program covered the costs of in-home and community-based services for vets with spinal cord injuries, ALS, and other complex medical conditions at 65%. So if you were bringing in a respite care worker, or you were bringing in someone to help out with home health and home care, the VA would cover 65% of that out-of-pocket cost. Well, guess what? New announcement, very exciting. The VA is now going to cover 100%. of those costs. Isn't that fantastic? So this is going to increase, and again, it's for home health aides. So those are actually more kind of the nurses, the certified nurse assistants. They can come in and they can actually do, biometric readings. They can do blood pressure readings. They can prescribe medications or extend them for you, renew them for you. They can do things like give shots. Usually they're prescribed by a doctor. That's how you get a home health aide. The home care is a little bit more of those non-medical, non-nursing type activities that I was talking about. Just being a companion or preparing a meal or helping out around the house or helping a loved one get dressed or get in and out of the bathroom or whatever it is. And respite community adult day care. So again, if your loved one has dementia or PTSD and you work and you want to have them be stimulated during the day and not just kind of sitting there, you can take them to an adult daycare center and that cost will now be covered by the VA. Anyway, kind of exciting news. It gives, and this was the quote from the VA, it says, vets receive high quality care while remaining in their homes surrounded by friends and family. That came from the VA Secretary, Doug Collins. So this is great. This is good news. And hopefully this is news that is, as I said, it's going to just spread its fingers out into the general caregiving population and help out all the caregivers who are caring for loved ones who want to remain in their homes and have that independence and that comfort, that sanctuary of being at home and not being in a community somewhere, which is the desire of many older Americans. So that's our Well Home Design news. And now for this episode segment, we are going to turn to caregiving in the workplace. As you know, we love to bring you the latest trends, the latest benefits, the latest things that are happening in the workplace as it relates to employees who are caregiving. And I just want to do a quick note because now that we do these new newscasts every couple of weeks, we can kind of bring you the latest breaking news. So it just came out. We didn't have it quite prepared for this newscast, but in the next newscast that we do in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about a new study that just came out from care.com and the Care for Business unit around caregiving in the workplace and the costs of care. And we're going to highlight that. So I just wanted to give you a quick little shout out and an update to catch that on our next episode. But for this episode, a couple of really interesting things that I came across. And the first was, last week, January 30th, was National Plan a Vacation Day. Okay, I missed that. I haven't planned my vacation yet this year. Hope many of you did because there is a study that shows that you risk heart attacks if you don't take vacation. So let me explain. First of all, this is really kind of interesting, I think, both for employers to pay attention to as well as the employees, and particularly the caregiving employees who are working. A lot of reasons why we don't take vacations. This is in the study that was done. It's like, well, my team will flounder without me there, or there'll be too much work for me to make up. It'll just be a big pile of things I have to do, and I'll have to work late to catch up. I can't take a vacation because I'm caregiving for my older mom or my older dad or my in-laws, and I have to be there for them. So I can't take vacations. I'm a caregiver. So these are a lot of the excuses, of course, that we give. I remember one of my excuses when I worked way, way back. It's been around a long time. But I used to love to stack up my vacation time because at the end of the year with this one employer, we had the option of cashing it out. So just to let you know, I was really lucky because part of my job was I had to travel a lot on business. So when I would go to places, beautiful places, we'd go to Europe, we'd go to Japan, we'd go to Australia or whatever. I would always tack on a couple extra days or whatever, and then I would kind of take a little mini vacation that was after we did all our business stuff. So it made it really easy for me to do that. And yes, I took days off, of course, but not a lot because I was one of those people. I think 50% of employees don't take the paid vacation time that they actually get, and only a quarter of American workers get paid vacation time. So of those who do get paid time off, only about people are only using about 50% of the time that they're given. And I was certainly one of those. But it was always nice to have the extra cash at the end of the year. So I don't know if employers even do that anymore. Probably not. But it did keep me from taking more vacation time in that sense. And now that I'm older, and since I've become a gerontologist and I study obviously the brain and neuroscience and health and all that, I realize and I recognize how important taking time off is, getting that respite, getting that break. Even again, I talk so much about caregivers only getting 7 minutes to get a break, which is so critical. But you need the time because that's where you refresh, you re-energize, you can reset things. You can get past a lot of the turmoil and emotions that are building up on you that create that caregiver burnout. Um, so let me tell you what this is about. So this is actually not a new study, but it is still recognized as this seminal study that was done. And it's called the Framingham Heart Study. Okay. So it was done over 30 years ago, but it is still, or 20 years ago, sorry. And it's still the gold standard, and they continue to track a lot of employees or people who either stayed in the workforce or left the workforce and retired. They still track their heart health based on all these different elements of their lives and their lifestyle. And what they found is, and they reported this a couple of years ago, they found that men who don't take vacations were 30% more likely to have a heart attack within the next few years. And for women, the heart attack risk went up 50%. Now, we know for caregivers, you can probably elevate those percentages just because you've got the added stress, the emotional turmoil of caring for a loved one. So not getting that break, not getting that refresh moment, or, you know, minutes, days, whatever it is going to really affect your health. Um, and this is, the researchers took into consideration a lot of other factors. Do these people have diabetes? Do they smoke? So all of the things that can cause heart attacks, they kind of took those to the side and only looked at the vacation piece of this and ruled out all those other factors that could contribute to your heart health risk and your heart attack risk. And they said, even the healthiest people in this group are going to have this heart attack risk from not taking a break, not getting a vacation. So, again, I wanted to bring this to, focus on, because I do think for all of the HR people out there that I know listen to our newscast, the people who work in, for employers and manage, employee education and employee information. I think it's really critical because I do think it's important for employers to help guide their employees to see the health benefits of certain things. And certainly if you're offering things like paid time off, you almost want to coach the employees to take it. And they may say, well, I can't because I'm a caregiver. That's a very common response. So now it becomes really critical for employers to recognize, okay, it's not enough for us to say, hey, employee who's caregiving for mom or dad or grandpa or whatever, you should take some time off, take a vacation. Well, I may not be able to do that. Okay. How do we get you there? So it's not just telling them to go do it, because this is often something that I've seen in the caregiving world. We say, practice better self-care, meditate more, walk, eat better, do this, whatever. What, caregivers know that. They're not dumb people. They listen to the news. They, know their health, what's healthy for them and all of that. But it's like, how? How do I do it when I've got no time? When I can't untether myself because I can't leave my mom alone? She doesn't like to have people in the house, or, whatever it is. So we've got to get better at bringing the solutions to the caregivers, not just what you should do, but how you can do it. And part of that is if the employer has a care navigation type service where you can get access to an expert, senior care expert, who can guide you and say, okay, let's think about this. Tell me a little bit more about your situation. Okay, here are some options. That is really what caregivers need. They need help with the solution, the how, not the you should, but how do I do it? So I want to just bring that up because I do think this is both a an employer message. Employers, please recognize your caregiving employees need this kind of navigation and guidance. And then to the employees who are caregivers, my comment is there are some things out there that you may not think about that can give you help. So I'm going to give you a couple of little ideas, things I know that are out there. I know there's probably other really great local programs I'm not aware of. So if you know of those, share them with your colleagues who are caregiving, share them with us. So we can bring them onto the newscast or even onto the podcast that we do. But let me just tell you about being able to kind of get a break as a caregiver. First of all, there's something called respite care. And respite care is where a professional comes into the home to just be a companion with your loved one, make sure that they're safe, make sure they're taken care of, particularly for dementia caregivers. You know, the loved one's not going to wander, they're not going to get agitated. And then you can get a break for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, maybe, you know, even an evening or whatever it is. And groups like Clarity for Charity, which I love, which, as I mentioned, I'm doing the CareCon event with, they give scholarships to dementia caregivers for respite care. So you can get a scholarship through them. You submit your information and they provide then certain hours of respite so you can get that break. So that's one way, okay? And they're just one of the many nonprofits. Many other, nonprofit groups will do this. There's also something called virtual vacations. Okay, we did a podcast with two virtual vacation agencies, Discover Live and Wowzitude, and we'll have links to those. That is where you can actually be with your loved one, or your grandkids could be with their grandparents, even if they don't live in the same household or even the same city, and you jump onto this virtual trip that you can set up. Or you get your loved one signed up to take a virtual trip with other seniors, all from the comfort of home. So these are wonderful ways that either you can give them a vacation, and while that's happening, you might be able to get a break, or you can go with them and that, hey, being able to have a guide in Paris take me through the Louvre and, the outskirts of Paris, the little nuances or whatever would be lovely. I'd love to sit with my mom and do that. So that's another thing that you could do. There's also something called hospitality stays. If you haven't heard of this, this has been very popular in the cystic fibrosis community. And what it is there are certain assisted living and memory care communities that will allow your loved one to come and stay like a resort, like a hotel. So, for instance, let's just say that you want to take the kids to Disney World. Mom has early dementia. She doesn't want to have anyone come into her home. That's going to be a problem for her. So what you do is you set up her own vacation. She gets to go to one of these beautiful places like Silverado, or the one near me is Vivanti. I want to go every weekend to Vivanti because it is like staying at the Ritz-Carlton. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I'll never be able to afford it if I had to live there, but maybe for a weekend I can afford it. But you can go do that. And so you work with those communities to see what availability there is. And it can be anywhere from an overnight stay, a weekend stay, up to, I think, 1 or 2 weeks. But again, it's based on availability. So you have to kind of plan ahead. But what a great way to maybe get your loved one to see their own vacation while you take your vacation and know that they're safe and all of that. The in-home companionship again. So maybe your loved one is fine having someone come in and stay with them. And there's a lot of different options for securing those services through agencies. There's also online marketplaces where you kind of match up with somebody, that you like. There's another agency we talked to Neil Shaw at Care Yaya. He uses medical students to provide care so they can come into the home and be the companion, but also they've got a medical background. So, it's kind of like they understand and they're cognizant and can look for maybe some warning signs. The flip side is you let your loved one know, hey, you're helping this medical student become a lot more savvy about the older population. So in a lot of ways, you're teaching them as much as they're helping you. So that's kind of a really nice collaboration there. And then just getting the mini breaks, as I say, take the baby step, take the 7 minutes, take the 7 hours, take the whatever it is, get an afternoon, get an evening. Just go book yourself into a really nice hotel for one night with your loved one or with your sister and watch, rom-com movies or whatever it is. But, do something that just gets you out of the norm, lets you just pause, lets you breathe, lets you feel the happiness hormones. And it's amazing what it'll do to get you back into that. Okay, I'm back. I got my energy back. I can do this again, because it gets really hard. And the one thing we talk about in caregiver burnout is because you're never getting break. You're not feeling valued, which is part of burnout. And we talk a lot about that. Value is part of it. So you have to figure out ways that you can feel that value. If you're not getting it from the person you're caring for, maybe it's people around you who can reinforce that you're so valuable in what you're doing. If you listen to me, I'm telling you all the time how valuable you are. You're valuable to society as well as your loved one. But it's value plus just the emotional toll of just getting the break, getting your mind out of it, not worrying, being able to hopefully let go and enjoy some things in your life. So we want to make sure you get those mini breaks. And again, 7 minutes a day. If you start that way, it's slow, it's tiny, but it really does help. Gives you a little bit of your power back as a caregiver, that I can do this. You know what? It's tiny, but it's good. So those are just a couple of things to think about caregivers in the workplace. And next up, we're going to have our pop culture segment. We're going to talk about this tragic event that's happened to Savannah Guthrie with her mom, Nancy, who it looks like has been abducted. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Culture segment for this newscast is focusing on a really tragic incident that has really only unfolded over the last week or so, and that is the story about the Today Show morning host Savannah Guthrie and it looks like possible abduction of her 84-year-old mother, Nancy, from her home in Tucson, Arizona. So, of course, we've all been glued to our TV screens and online news trying to get the latest updates. It's a very interesting, I guess, is one word to call it. It's an interesting case because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that aren't falling into kind of the predictive, uh, kind of ways that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are kind of used to dealing with these things. I also think that, we often hear about possible abductions of children, or sometimes even of like a spouse, but an older parent is really different. And it brought to mind for me, I'm not going to recover the news for you because you can find that and you're probably been following it anyway, what the latest things are that we're discovering. But it really highlighted, I think, some things that are really important for us as family caregivers, particularly of older loved ones. What are the things that we can do to protect them? While this is so rare, and I think, obviously many of us don't probably have to worry as much about having an older loved one who is abducted, there are still some issues we need to think about in terms of that safety in the home. Now, I just want to make a quick note. I'm recording this on Saturday, February 7th. So this is the latest that we have known about the case and about the situation. There could be something that unfolds tonight or tomorrow or over the next couple of days before we get this posted next week for you. So I just wanted to caveat that because you may say, oh, well, we already know this or whatever. Well, we didn't as of the point where we were recording this. We're very much hoping. First of all, I just want to say that our prayers and thoughts go out to Savannah Guthrie and her family, and particularly her mom, to stay strong. We're very, very hopeful she'll be recovered safely, but it is really scary. And, when you think about there are 22 million solo agers like Nancy. So these are older folks who are living at home alone. And that puts you kind of in a new category for safety issues. So what are the things we need to know? Okay, so first of all, I just want to talk quickly about wearables. Wearables are becoming much more popular for everybody. A lot of older adults are really embracing, whether it's a wearable smartwatch or the Aura rings for sleep and things like that. there's wearables that have been out there for a long time, like the lavaliers that you can wear around your neck and press the button, hi, I've fallen, help me, or the things you can put on your belt. Those are kind of the older version of things. But what was interesting is in the news reporting, it was said that she had an Apple Watch. And we know that the Apple Watch has GPS tracking in it. I just full disclosure, I am an advisor, a gerontology advisor for a company called TheoraCare. And in fact, Steve Popovich, who is the CEO and founder, we had on our podcast, season 4, episode 45. I'll have that link. Steve talks a lot about older adults and wearables and the trends and all that. But, not all smartwatches are the same. The most popular being the Apple Watch because it's kind of cool looking or whatever. It does have the GPS tracking. It does have things like a fall detector, but I will just say, just quick shout out to TheoraCare. Not all fall detection services are the same. You have to have super sophisticated technology, and TheoraCare is really kind of like top of the line. But that GPS tracking can get you within 15 feet. Typically, if you're using the latest GPS technology, you can discover the location of somebody up to within 15 feet. And in fact, TheoraCare just had a news story in Detroit where a man with Alzheimer's had wandered away from home. His wife did not know it, but she had the app on her phone with his wearable, his TheoraCare wearable that he was wearing. And they, with the help of the police and the canine units, they were able to track him to 15 feet and recover him. Some of these wearables also have a one button, emergency SOS. So an auto call, you just could press the button and it goes immediately to 911 or to you as a family caregiver. But here's the problem. If she was truly abducted, which it looks like she was, they made her remove the watch. So there you go. So it was actually used in one of the ransom notes, apparently as a proof of life, because they could say where they left it. So these criminals are getting a lot more savvy, right? As much as we have new technology to help us out, the family caregivers, the criminals are listening too, right? They're paying attention. So unfortunately, she wasn't able to keep that watch on so that maybe we could have tracked her. Now there are some options out there that are interesting, and I say this and I am like, I hope no criminals are listening to me. No. But they'll, as much as we can tell you things to think about might help, as I said, the criminal element in our society is going to stay on top of these things as well. But something I thought about is that may not be as well known. There is jewelry now where it is just an emergency button you can press. I don't like them for the home necessarily because if you hit your head or if you faint and you're unconscious, you can't press a button. But if you are abducted or you're in an emergency situation in a parking lot or something, you could clutch your necklace and press it, and they would not know necessarily that that necklace had that button in it. It also has GPS tracking so that you wear the necklace. Now, again, they may make you remove all of your jewelry. They get savvier, but that's just something I wanted to bring forward that's out there. There's also eyeglasses that she would need if they were to take her because, she can't see. She needs her glasses to watch. Well, VSP, I worked on a research project where VSP put a GPS tracker into the side of the glasses on the side. So there's a lot of stuff happening out there that you may want to just, keep on top of as an option. But again, all of those things aren't going to do any good if they aren't kept with the person. The next thing was the surveillance cameras. So, apparently there were cameras. I think she had Nest. I don't think it was Ring. I think it was Nest, Google Nest. But she had cameras in the front and the back of the house. They disarmed them, and then they took the cameras with them. Okay, so that's a problem. She also lived in an area there in Tucson where the homes are on kind of larger pieces of property. So it's not like your neighbors right across the street. Your neighbor may be way down the lane. You don't have somebody just right over the fence in your backyard or whatever it is. These are big properties. And so that's really unfortunate. And it's a dense desert area, not very well lit. The people that live in these areas love that because it allows them to see the beautiful stars at night. It gives them the ambiance of truly peacefulness, but unfortunately, it's a very dark area. Not a lot of cameras and lights going on. So she was really removed from any neighbors really being able to see anything. And then for a lot of our older loved ones, we get sensors in the home. Now, a lot of the sensors, because one of the biggest things that happens in the home are the falls, right? We want to prevent the falls as much as possible because we know not only is your loved one maybe going to break a hip or break an arm, but once you have a fall, you have a higher risk of falling again at home. We see this so often in our older population. And that then means it precipitates you having to either go live in an assisted living community to be watched over, or you kind of um, put your own death at an earlier date, if you will, because a lot of people who are older don't recover well from these falls. They become more fearful, and unfortunately, it's just not good for overall health. So, but you can put sensors in the home that predict the falls. So again, this theoric care that I work with, they do that as well, where you can actually not only detect if someone has fallen, but you can predict if someone's going to fall. But if sensors are in the home, you also would be able to pick up on, oh, there's other people in the home. Well, how many? Two. Okay, now we know, right, for law enforcement, there's two people. So I know that there's a lot of reasons why older adults don't want to be invaded, like with nanny cams. They don't want to be on video all day. I get that. I totally agree with it. I wouldn't want a video watching me around my house. But as you live alone and you get older, you start to think about, the sensor is not going to show what I'm doing, but it is certainly going to show if like there's abnormal activity, or is it the dog and not a four-legged person, right? It's a dog, but all those different kinds of things can be helpful. But again, the criminals overcame the help because they disabled the cameras. They took the cameras with them. So anything that may have been recorded. The other thing, if we understand correctly from the news reports, is that her subscription, I think, had lagged. So she had not kept the subscription. You have to have a monthly subscription for all of this. Then they'll archive some of it for you for a certain period of time before they overwrite it. She didn't have that. So it may not have yielded any good information or help anyway. So you want to really pay attention to your older loved ones. If they've got a Ring or a Simply Safe or a Google Nest or any of these other types of things that can help with the cameras for surveillance, is the subscription up to date? That's a big one, right? Because it is very easy to let those things lapse. The next thing that I've only heard one or two reports, and I was a little disturbed by this, but I know they can't know. But one of the things that I think we can help educate the public about, and particularly educate family caregivers about, is, our older loved ones are very vulnerable, not just in their health status, because we understand that Nancy has heart issues. She has a pacemaker. She's on daily medication for her heart health issues, probably some blood pressure medication and some others. Um, and so we know that's, super important. But, just as our younger children, our older population is very sensitive to heat, to cold, so any kind of extreme weather, and also to dehydration. Okay. And so and much more so than just like you or me, the normal adults, you have to stay hydrated. An older adult who is dehydrated will start to have delirium and can have panic attacks, can act out. This is going to be very unsettling for anyone who may have abducted her, right? They're not going to know how to deal with this. But also, because of her special situation with the pacemaker, she's even at higher risk. So it could potentially, dehydration could trigger arrhythmias, palpitations, or pacemaker malfunction due to the electrolyte imbalances that it's trying to measure. And so those would all show up on the pacemaker information, which I think they still can access. I'm not quite sure about that, but I heard one report from a doctor who said the reports on her pacemaker will continue to come in. It doesn't mean that she has to be right next to her Apple Watch or anything else that may be tracking other things. So at least they would know, which then begs the question, well, then they know far more than they're telling us on the news, right? Because that's my biggest fear is that we've gone days now that she could be dehydrated. She's gone numerous days without her medications, perhaps. And really, when you're on that type of blood pressure at her age, you can't go more than a day or two because it's going to trigger a heart attack. It's going to trigger a stroke. It's also going to trigger kidney failure. So those are all of the dire health things that she is facing. Um, and obviously, if you're a criminal, you don't know these things. The general public doesn't really know them. You're not going to be in tune or sensitive to that, and it makes me very fearful. But I remain hopeful that they will be able to recover. And then finally, pets. There's good and bad to pets when you're older. Sometimes they're hard to take care of, particularly if it's a dog. You've got to walk the dog and you got to pick up after the dog and all these other things. So a lot of older people sometimes don't have pets. Or if they do, they might have help. Maybe it's a kid after school that comes and walks the dog for them or whatever it is. Dogs can certainly also be surveillance, right? Their hearing is exceptional, except for when they get older, like my dog. She hears nothing now. We could have a whole host of criminals in the house, and she would have no idea. She'd be snoring on the floor. But they're good for anxiety and all of that. The bad news or the downside is if you have bad actors like these guys or gals, we don't know who it is. We don't even know if it's more than one person. I keep saying more than one because I think it would be super, super difficult to have done all of this bad stuff just on your own and help Nancy get out of the house and all of that. So I'm assuming it's at least a couple people. But they could hurt the dog, they could kill the pet. Being disconnected from your pet, which has been a companion to you, can be really anxiety driving. So there's downsides certainly to the pet stuff. But then the tragic situation that happened with the actor Gene Hackman, where what we believe, at least from that, is that his wife died first in their home. And again, they lived on a very large piece of land, not close to other neighbors and not necessarily having people come in and out all day long every day. They did finally have somebody who I think was the pool person or the landscaper or something who found them. But it appears that she died first. He had dementia. He may not have known what happened to her, so he could have been confused. Then it appears that he passed away, but it took a few days after she died. And then they had two dogs on site. Now, whether the dogs were howling, sometimes dogs will just lay down next to you if they're distraught over, they can smell death and all of that. But then the dogs eventually did pass away as well from malnutrition because they weren't getting any water and any food. So tragic, tragic, tragic. And it's hard to talk about this because it's not uplifting and it's not positive, but I wanted to take it as lessons learned, things to think about, what we need to know about our own parents. Like I said, what kinds of things do they have to keep them safe? Are they maintaining subscriptions and all that other stuff? And while this is very rare, I mean, it's as I said, I can't remember in my memory the last time a parent was abducted. I remember I wasn't alive at this time, but I remember stories about Frank Sinatra's son was abducted and the Getty heir was abducted. And it's usually a kid, right? It's usually somebody younger or a spouse. But having an older loved one, abducted seems rare and, very unique. But as we've been talking about this over the last few days, I have to tell you something very scary. I heard from one of my neighbors that in our little sleepy coastal town where I live, because I live in an area that is not too huge, and it seems very safe. And I know nowhere is safe, but I don't know. It kind of seems like one of those very safe neighborhoods where nothing bad ever happens. But listen to this. So he told me that just a little ways away from us on Balboa Island, which is very near. It's about a mile or so from me, but it's kind of in our little coastal community here. An 87-year-old woman who had lost her husband 6 months earlier, and so she was living alone. She was robbed at gunpoint in her home at night. Now, she survived, She got kind of beat up, lots of bruises, broken bones, and all that. And again, at 87, those are hard to recover from. I mean, it's hard to recover at any age, but 87, we just don't recover that fast. But this happened a mile from me. Okay. So you can never be too careful, and you can never be too cautious, and you can never cheap out on your safety, what you need to do to kind of keep yourself safe. So with that, I just want to say, thanks for listening, and thanks for tuning in to our newscast. And again, our prayers, our wishes go out to Savannah Guthrie and her family, and prayers for Nancy that we're going to recover her safe. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club News the week of February 9th. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our Caregiving Club YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content. Our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club on-air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiving Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherri and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.